Hi, I'm Kaylin. On my 20th birthday, my sister gave me a glitter crown labeled King of Disappointment. Everyone laughed. My mom toasted to it. My dad took pictures. I was the one flipping burgers for my own party. 3 days later, they apologized. But by then, I'd already cut the power, canceled the insurance, and closed every account that carried their names. They thought it was a joke. But what kind of family plans your humiliation like a surprise party? Ever wonder what happens when the quiet one finally speaks? What if I told you the crown was just the beginning? I should have known something was off when they didn't let me help set up. My birthday, my backyard, and somehow I was just a guest. The tablecloths were pastel pink, strung too tight across the folding tables. Jolene flitted around like she was the mayor of Springdale, tossing air kisses and laughing just a little too loud. And the guests? Not a single one was from my circle. All her friends, people who barely remembered my name. They brought out a cake I was allergic to, chocolate hazelnut. I hadn't eaten that since my ER trip in college. When I pointed it out to Corliss, my mother, she waved a dismissive hand. Just scrape off the top, don't make it a thing. I forced a smile as guests hugged me with that awkward stiffness you reserve for coworkers you don't know well. No one asked me how I felt. They just shoved phones in my face for selfies, or posed with Jolene while I stood behind the grill, flipping burgers. One guy, I think he was Jolene's friend from Pilates, joked, "You're the birthday chef, huh? Multi-talented." I was too busy making sure the meat didn't burn to laugh. Midway through the party, Jolene called everyone's attention. "We have a special surprise for our very own Kaylin," she said, grinning like she was giving me a scholarship. She reached into a paper bag and pulled out a crown, cheap cardboard, glittered in red. Thick, blocky letters across the front. King of Disappointment. People erupted with laughter. Even my dad chuckled. Mom didn't even lift her glass of rosé. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe this was a prank, something we could all laugh about later. But then Jolene stepped forward and placed it on my head. "There," she said, straightening it. "Now you finally have a title." I smiled. Thin. Mechanical. Just wide enough to make it seem like I was playing along. "It's just a joke, Kaylin," Jolene chirped. "Lighten up." A joke you had printed. A joke you rehearsed. A joke that stuck. After that, no one handed me a plate. I was asked to take photos of everyone else. "Can you get one of us with the cake?" "Oh, and a group shot. Make sure everyone's in it." I took a dozen pictures that night. I wasn't in a single one. At some point, I found myself clearing plates, picking up half-drunk sodas and tossed napkins. A cousin leaned in and said, "Didn't know you were working catering now." I laughed. Because that's what you do when the pain is so familiar. It stops stinging and just settles in like background noise. And the worst part? The credit. People kept praising Jolene for the party. "You're such a great sister." "This is so thoughtful." Corliss beamed with pride, like she had raised Miss Hospitality. No one knew I'd paid for the decorations, or booked the tables, or ordered the food under Jolene's name, because her card was maxed out again. I was the scaffolding, and she was the photo op. It wasn't just the crown, it was the applause after. I stood there, in my own backyard, wearing a joke on my head and cooking for people who didn't know my middle name. And still, I smiled while cutting the cake. Even though it was Jolene's favorite flavor, I wiped down the counter as the living room filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Jolene's voice carried loudest, already telling stories like the whole evening had been her idea. I heard someone toast to "the best big sister ever," and felt the rag in my hand soak through with something colder than dishwater. There's something twisted about scrubbing ketchup off plastic plates while people celebrate your humiliation 5 feet away. That crown, King of Disappointment, wasn't a prank. It was a label they'd been dying to stick on me, and the moment they did, they cheered like it was liberation. I walked into the kitchen where Jolene was sipping her seltzer and scrolling through photos on her phone. "Can we talk?" I asked. She didn't even look up. "Sure. But if this is about the crown, relax. You've always been kinda heavy." Thought a little roast might lighten you up. I bit the inside of my cheek. You planned that? Jolene smirked. Of course not. Well, maybe, but it was funny. Everyone laughed, Kaylin. Don't be so uptight. She didn't blink, like it cost her nothing to cut me open and toss glitter on the wound. You know I've been the one paying for this house, right? I said. That made her pause. Briefly. Then she tilted her head, smug. Oh, come on. You live here. That's your rent. We all contribute. I paid your car insurance last month. Jolene gave a small laugh, like I'd confessed something embarrassing. Because you're obsessed with being the savior. No one asked you to. You volunteered. That's on you. She stepped closer, dropped her voice. You were raised, fed, sheltered, and you still want credit? And there it was. Not just cruelty, clarity. She meant every word. I turned away before she could see my face break, then headed to the living room. Maybe, just maybe, Corliss or Wendell would say something different. Maybe they'd acknowledge how wrong this all felt. But when I opened my mouth, Wendell cut in with that familiar weariness. It was just a party, Kaylin. People laugh. You've always been sensitive. Don't make it bigger than it is. Corliss barely looked up from her phone. Your sister meant well. She went through a lot to make today special. Special! That was the word they used. I looked at both of them. The people who had watched me grow up, who had leaned on me when Jolene couldn't hold a job, who had handed me the family grocery list more times than I could count. And all I saw were two people who refused to see me at all. They weren't neutral. They were aligned. And I was on the outside, again. When someone laughs while you bleed, and the rest of them hand that person a towel, that's not a family. That's a production. I didn't slam the door when I got to my room. I closed it like I was sealing a tomb. Sat down on the floor, the crown still in my hair like some cheap artifact of a cruel empire. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I looked at it, really looked at it. So be it, I whispered. Then I crawled over to my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked on a folder I hadn't touched in months. It was called Contingency in Case They Go Too Far. I woke up before the sun. I hadn't slept much anyway. The house was still quiet, but I could hear the faint clink of dishes in the sink, the ones I'd washed last night while they passed around drinks and toasted to each other. My back still ached from leaning over the grill, my face from holding that damn smile. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I wasn't ready to open messages, but habit won. The first thing on my screen was a video, birthday recap posted by Jolene. The thumbnail showed a slow-motion confetti pop, everyone laughing. I pressed play. There I wasn't, not once. Every clip, every photo had been curated like a marketing campaign. Jolene laughing, Jolene with the cake, Jolene giving a toast, wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before. It was all so polished, edited with upbeat music and light filters. My name was in the title, but not in the content. Somehow they managed to make a party about me without me, I muttered, eyes dry. Scrolling through the comments, I saw lines like, "Best party ever." Jolene, you're the real MVP. You always go above and beyond for your sister. It wasn't just insulting, it was theft. Emotional, social, even financial. I'd paid for that cake. I'd arranged the food delivery. I'd covered the cost of the table rentals when Jolene's card bounced. She promised to Venmo me after payday. That never came. And now, she was the hero of the narrative. I leaned back on my pillow and stared at the ceiling. For a brief second, I let my mind pretend maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe she forgot to tag me. Maybe she didn't realize how it looked. Then my phone buzzed with a new message. Hey, was that you in Jolene's video? Someone told me you're still living off your parents. It was from Emily, a friend from college who I hadn't spoken to in months. I stared at the screen, pulse slowing to a crawl. Living off my parents? That's what they were telling people? My fingers moved before my brain caught up. I opened a spreadsheet app and pulled up my personal finances. Every grocery bill, every utility I'd paid, Jolene's tuition top-up, her car insurance, all with my name on it. No reimbursements, no acknowledgement, just silence. Then I remembered that brunch from last week, when I'd met Jolene and her friends downtown. She had laughed with them, casually tossing out, "Kaylin's still figuring things out. We let her crash with us until she gets stable." And I had smiled. Quietly, not correcting her. I had paid for that brunch. Quietly, with my card. "They didn't just erase me, they rewrote me," I said aloud. I got up and printed one page from my spreadsheet. Just one. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, next to a sticky note with my rent due date. "You can't erase what I paid for." Elvis once said, "Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a time, but it ain't going away." I wasn't trying to make them look bad. I just wasn't going to let them keep pretending. I opened my notes app and titled a new entry. What they said, what really happened. And then I began to log it all. Every twist, every transaction, every moment someone told me I was too emotional, too sensitive, too much. I backed it up to the cloud, encrypted and safe. If they could rewrite the story, then so could I. The difference was, I had the receipts. A few hours passed. I didn't eat, didn't shower, just wrote. Then, while taking a break, I opened Instagram again and saw a photo reposted by someone I didn't even recognize. Me in the background, barely visible, out of focus. The caption read, "Family goals." I laughed. Not loudly, not bitterly. Just enough to feel the irony in my chest. They call it family, I call it fiction. The air felt still that morning, like something had shifted, but the world hadn't caught up yet. I sat up slowly in bed, sunlight creeping through the blinds in quiet strips across the wall. I hadn't checked my phone since yesterday. I didn't need a screen to tell me what I already knew. There was something colder than sadness moving through me now. Not grief, not even anger. Clarity. I slid out from under the covers and padded across the room, barefoot, to my desk. The laptop was still open from the night before. The folder labeled Contingency blinked back at me like it had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I opened my banking dashboard. What started as a glance became a deep dive. Transfer after transfer. My name, Kaylin R. Holloway, on every single transaction. Rent for the house, tuition payments, utility bills, insurance premiums, grocery deliveries, auto repairs, even Jolene's dental work last spring when she forgot her card. Line after line. My fingerprints on their survival. Every time they said, "We'll figure it out," I figured it out. I whispered, scrolling faster. The numbers climbed until they blurred together. When I finally stopped to add them up, the figure on the screen was higher than I expected. 5 digits. No commas. Just weight. I sat back in the chair and let the weight land. And then, like clockwork, my memory offered up flashbacks in quick, cutting flashes. Standing in a grocery checkout line while Mom's card was declined. She looked at me with those practiced eyes, not panicked, expectant, like she knew I'd step in, signing Jolene's car insurance as a cosigner. "Just for a month," she said, "until my bonus hits." There was never a bonus, only more bills. Funny how fast just this once becomes a job description. I opened a new spreadsheet, titled it, "What I Paid So You Could Pretend I Wasn't There." It wasn't bitter, it was business. I logged everything, date, amount, purpose, who it benefited. I highlighted every entry that went toward Jolene's lifestyle. Brunches, spa days, those new shoes she wore in the birthday recap video. Then I wrote the email. Subject. Visibility body. You've erased me from your memories. I'll give you the record instead. I attached the spreadsheet and hit send. Jolene, Corliss, Wendell, all 3. No drama, no threats, just clarity in .xls format. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. Then I clicked into my own savings. Hawaii 143 sir. That was all I had to my name after carrying this family for 2 years. Not even enough for a deposit and first month's rent in a town this size. I wasn't generous. I was scared to say no. That was the real shame. Not that they took, but that I made it easy. I let the fear of being called selfish hold the door wide open. No is a complete sentence, I muttered. I'd read that somewhere. Anne Lamott, maybe. I used to roll my eyes at quotes like that. Now I was living it. I printed the invoice, just one page, and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not for them, for me. If no one else will name what I gave, I will. The printer beeped as it finished. I stood there staring at that paper like it was a certificate, not of achievement, but of survival. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Wendell. We need to talk. I didn't know it was this serious. I stared at it. No response. Not yet. I hadn't sent the invoice so they'd talk. I sent it so I could stop. It had been 2 days since I sent the invoice. 2 days since I laid out every dollar, every receipt, every moment they pretended I didn't matter while spending the money I quietly provided. And in those 2 days, nothing. No one mentioned the email. Not at breakfast, not in passing, not in the silence that had replaced basic decency in this house. Silence doesn't mean remorse. Sometimes it means they're just waiting long enough to say, "See? She got over it." I sat on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee, pretending it was the peace I'd earned. The air was heavy, not with heat, with denial. And then my phone buzzed. A message from Corliss. I know things got a little intense, but family needs to stick together. You've always been the dependable one. I read it once. Then again. That word. Dependable. Not loved. Not valued. Just useful. I wrote back. Are you acknowledging what happened? She replied almost instantly. I just think it's time to move on. You're still family. It's your duty. Duty. I stared at that word until the screen dimmed. I wasn't born into duty. I was trained into silence. That evening, dinner passed like it always did. Quiet, empty, functional. Jolene chewed like nothing had happened, still scrolling on her phone between bites. Wendell buried his face in the newspaper like it was a bunker. Corliss hummed while spooning mashed potatoes onto plates like we were a family from a TV show rerun. No one looked at me. No one asked how I was. This family doesn't heal, I thought. It buries. I finally broke the silence. Did any of you read the email I sent? Wendell rustled the paper, but didn't answer. Jolene smirked without looking up. It was dramatic. You've always had a flair for the theatrical. And just like that, the conversation was over. Later that night, another message from Corliss lit up my phone. If you felt hurt, I'm sorry you saw it that way. But please don't let this divide us. I read it 3 times. That wasn't an apology. That was gaslighting with a smile. They didn't want me to be okay. They just wanted me to shut up and resume the role. Daughter, fixer, doormat. Quiet and reliable. I started typing. I wasn't hurt because you joked. I was hurt because you believed it. Then deleted it. Some things are too true to be sent to people who won't understand. I unplugged the Wi-Fi router from under my desk. Not in anger, just quiet decision. Then I stood and pulled down every photo from the corkboard. Family trips, fake smiles, Christmas mornings where I took the pictures but wasn't in any of them. I didn't rip them, I just stacked them in a shoebox. Not to erase, just to make space. They don't notice when I disappear from the pictures. So let's see what happens when I disappear in real life. I logged into the payment dashboard, the one connected to utilities, insurance, rent. Line by line, I started unlinking my accounts. Water, electric, internet. Gone, gone, gone. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment, it was self-preservation. They ran the machine on my silence. But I wasn't going to be the fuel anymore. I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert. Overdraft warning. I froze. I hadn't used my card all week. Not once since I shut off the autopays. Not since I stopped fueling the machine. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some technical glitch. But when I logged in, I found 2 charges. Same day, same store, both under Jolene's name. one for a spa treatment, the other for a new pair of sneakers she'd been eyeing. The card used? Mine. One I'd removed from the shared account weeks ago, or so I thought. I walked down the hallway, phone in hand, straight to her room. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through her phone like she had nothing in the world to worry about. She didn't even flinch when I spoke. "Did you use my card?" She barely looked up. "Relax. It was saved from before. I thought you wouldn't notice." That word, thought, hit me harder than the money missing. "You didn't think I'd notice," I said, my voice low. "Or you didn't think I'd matter?" Jolene blinked, finally setting her phone down. "It's not a big deal, Kaylin. It's not like you're starving." It wasn't about money. It was about the ease with which she decided I was a resource, not a person. I turned around without another word. Back in my room, I took screenshots of every transaction, marked the dates, the vendors. I labeled the folder legal, in case, because we'd passed the point of betrayal. This wasn't family dysfunction. This was theft. I thought about telling Corliss, about demanding they do something, but I already knew what I'd hear. "It's just a misunderstanding. Let's not blow this out of proportion. They're your sister. They don't care about wrong or right. They care about comfort, keeping things quiet, keeping me quiet." So I didn't yell. I documented. They can ignore an argument, but they can't unsee proof. That night, Corliss knocked gently on my door. Her voice dipped in syrup. "Hey, sweetie, can you help cover the water bill this month? Just this one more time." I opened the door and looked her square in the face. "I already did, for the last 6 years." She blinked, taken aback. "What's with the attitude?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. What's with the assumption I'll keep bleeding for a family that calls it kindness when they take? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. That moment hung in the air like something rotting in the walls, unspoken but undeniable. After she walked away, I grabbed my laptop. One by one, I logged into every account linked to my name. Car insurance, electricity, Wi-Fi, health premiums, even the Netflix account Jolene always pretended was hers. Delete, remove, revoke, confirm. They don't get to choose what I give anymore. That part of the story ended when they turned generosity into a liability. When I was done, I stood in the kitchen, the fridge humming beside me. I wrote a note on a sticky pad and slapped it next to the grocery list Jolene never updated. "If you need help, ask someone you respect." I didn't sign it. They knew my handwriting. As I turned off the kitchen light and walked back to my room, my phone buzzed again. Jolene was live on Instagram. The title read, "Clearing the Air." Of course. She went public, so I opened my files. I poured my coffee in silence. The hum of the fridge, the only sound in the kitchen. The house felt unusually cheerful. Jolene's music leaked through the hallway. Corliss was humming like she hadn't read a single comment from last night's live stream. No one mentioned my absence in that video. No one mentioned me at all. They erased me in real time. With Wi-Fi and applause. I took my mug to the dining table and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked at me like it was asking permission. I didn't slam a single button. Every click was calculated, methodical. Water bill, disable autopay, electric, change login credentials, internet, remove saved card, health insurance, unlink bank routing. Jolene's name disappeared from my authorized users list like she had never existed. I didn't yell. I didn't announce it. I just stripped their access like I was finally closing a back door I never meant to leave open. "If you want independence," I said aloud to no one, "this is what it looks like." The coffee had gone cold by the time Corliss walked into the kitchen. She didn't look up from the paper she was holding. "Hey, sweetie," she said, like we hadn't traded words like razors 3 nights ago. "Could you drop off a check at the dentist for Jolene? She's been swamped." I took a breath, smiled politely. "If she has teeth, she has hands. She can go." She blinked, let out a chuckle that didn't match her eyes. "You okay?" "Finally." That night, After dinner passed in the usual performance of civility, Wendell at his crossword, Corliss wiping down an already clean countertop, Jolene texting with her neck tilted just enough to seem unreachable, I asked them to sit. They gathered in the living room reluctantly, like I'd called a meeting for something trivial. I stood, arms relaxed. "I won't take long," I said. "I just need to be clear." Jolene rolled her eyes, dramatic as always. "Is this a TED Talk?" I looked at her, calm, controlled. "No, but it's the last warning you'll get without paperwork attached." That made Wendell stir. "Let's not make this bigger than it is." "It already is," I replied. "You're just the last to admit it." They didn't respond, not because they didn't have something to say, because they realized the rules had changed and none of them knew the new playbook. Back in my room, I opened my journal, wrote the date at the top and the phrase that had been circling in my head since I clicked remove for the last account. Today wasn't about shouting. It was about not whispering anymore. I inserted my flash drive into the laptop and copied everything over. Banking records, screenshots, email threads, labeled the folder, failsafe. I remembered a quote I'd read years ago, but never let sink in until now. "Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm." Penny Reed had written that. It stayed with me like truth often does, quiet at first, then sharp. My laptop pinged just as I was about to shut it. A new email from Corliss. Subject, urgent, account access denied. Of course, they wanted a silent provider. I became a quiet firewall instead. I didn't even hear the email chime. I just saw the red notification dot glaring back at me from the top of my screen. Subject line, loan account flagged for default. Urgent. My heart didn't race. Not anymore. That part of me had worn out. I clicked without hesitation. The loan was in my name. The balance overdue. The mailing address matched this house. The email and phone number on file? Jolene's. You can't just steal a name and call it family. I called the creditor directly. The woman on the other end was polite in that careful, legally bound kind of way. After confirming my identity and verifying the last 4 digits of a number I hadn't used in 2 years, she spoke again. "Yes, Ms. Holloway. The account was opened 3 months ago under your full name, with your SSN, but the contact info matches someone else. Can you send me a copy of the signed application and the IP address used to submit it?" There was a pause. "Yes, we'll email that to you by the end of the day." That's all I needed. I added the new evidence to my folder, the one labeled legal in case, because this wasn't emotional anymore. This was criminal. I stepped into the hallway, my socked feet making no sound against the old wood floor. Jolene was in her room, door cracked just wide enough for the music from her Bluetooth speaker to spill out. She didn't look surprised when I knocked. "You opened a loan in my name," I said. She didn't even mute the music. "You always overreact. It was just paperwork to get through a rough patch." "Rough patch?" I blinked. "That's not what this is. That's not a patch. That's jail language." Her jaw clenched. Then, like a child scolded for stealing candy, she slammed her bedroom door. Not a denial, not even an apology, just noise. Later that afternoon, I walked to the library. I couldn't stand the sound of the house anymore, its fake calm, its bad insulation, holding in more history than heat. I wandered the aisles until I reached nonfiction, self-help, divorce, boundaries, codependency, trauma recovery. I reached for a worn paperback titled Breaking Family Contracts. The subtitle read, How to Heal When They Don't Want to Change. I tucked it under my arm and checked it out without saying a word. In the back corner of the library, near the computers, I heard my name. My full name, Danika's voice. "Kaylin? She's kind of high-strung, makes everything a drama." I stopped mid-step, peeked around the shelf. "She lives off her family, but acts like a martyr," she added, laughing softly. I didn't confront her. What would be the point? She wasn't talking to me. She was performing for someone else. I pulled out my phone, found her contact, and deleted it. That was enough. Some friends are just audience members in disguise. Back at home, I slipped into my room, left the book on my nightstand, and opened my journal. I wrote, "I'm not rewriting the ending anymore. I'm erasing the script." The sun was setting by the time I felt like I could breathe again. I laid back on the bed, feeling something solid in the softness of the mattress for the first time. My phone rang. I answered without looking at the caller ID. "Miss Holloway, this is Internal Affairs from Redwood Credit. We'd like to schedule a meeting. In person." My stomach didn't drop. My chest didn't tighten. I just exhaled. Turns out, when you stop being silent, people start whispering louder. The yelling started before I even left my bedroom. Corliss's voice echoed down the hallway, sharp and frantic, cut with static from the speakerphone. "I don't understand. How can the mortgage be invalid without her signature?" I cracked the door just enough to see Jolene pacing, one hand on her hip, the other flipping through papers like she expected the answer to fall out and fix itself. Wendell stood by the window, arms crossed, saying nothing. I turned away before they noticed me and shut the door behind me, slow and deliberate. They didn't notice when I signed the papers. Now they notice because I walked away. Back in my room, my inbox had a new email. Cosigner removal confirmed. Mortgage terms voided. Minutes later, Corliss was pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. "You need to fix this," she shouted. "You're putting us all in danger." I opened the door, leaned against the frame. Calm. "No," I said. "You put yourself there the second you decided I was your backup plan, not your daughter." Her mouth opened, but I didn't give her time to speak. Being family isn't a subscription you auto-renew. You can't just charge me without consent and call it love. I closed the door again. This time, she didn't knock twice. Wendell tried next. "We'll figure it out together," he said, voice lower, like a man trying to sound reasonable, without realizing how far past reasonable we were. I looked at him through the crack in the door. "You had 2 years to figure it out," I replied. "I was your solution. Now you face the equation." Then I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house without another word. At the cafe downtown, I ordered coffee I didn't really want and found a table in the back where I could watch the door. Not for anyone specific, just out of habit. I needed the space, the air, something that didn't smell like desperation or Febreze. I opened my phone and saw Jolene had gone live again. This time, she was crying. "She just started pulling away. We tried to be there, but she shut us out," she told her followers. "We're family, and she's tearing it apart." Comments came fast. "You're just mad she stopped letting you drain her." "She paid your bills and you gave her a crown?" "We saw the receipts. We saw the crown. We know who the disappointment really is." I saved the stream, screenshotted every top comment, not for vengeance, for memory. They tried to turn it into a circus. I built the tent, now I burn it. I opened Instagram, uploaded a single photo, no captioned breakdown, no hashtags, just a snapshot of the spreadsheet I'd emailed them days ago. The caption? "My silence paid for your comfort. That lease has expired." I didn't tag anyone, didn't wait for likes. I closed the app and leaned back, letting the bitter espresso settle on my tongue. I didn't need a crowd, I needed peace. The phone buzzed again, a new message, from Avis. Subject, good. Now let's tell the rest of the truth. The email from Avis landed in my inbox mid-afternoon, just as I finished rechecking the freeze notice on the joint savings account. Her subject line was plain, no more silence. The body was even shorter. "Just saw Jolene's stream. I've held my tongue long enough. I'm not doing it anymore." 2 minutes later, I got the screenshot. Avis had commented directly under Jolene's livestream, no anonymity, no filters. "Kaylin was the only adult in that house. You just didn't like the mirror she held up." That comment detonated everything. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was screaming into a void. One by one, the tide in the comment section shifted. Strangers, old neighbors, former classmates, people I barely remembered, chimed in. "I remember Kaylin walking Corliss to dialysis every Thursday. Didn't she cover Jolene's first year at college? Funny how the only one not speaking publicly is the one who actually paid for everything. Jolene tried to shut down the comments, but it was too late. People were already sharing clips, screenshots, receipts I hadn't even posted yet. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The truth doesn't need volume, just visibility. I scrolled Jolene's page. Her follower count dropped in real time. The curated aesthetic, sunny brunches, wellness quotes, and makeup tutorials now had comments like, "You should apologize, not monetize. This isn't transparency, it's projection." Meanwhile, Corliss had started texting extended family. "Please don't take sides," she wrote to one cousin. "This is a private matter." But the screenshots were already on group chats, and no amount of guilt tripping was going to make people unsee the truth. Receipts always resurface. That evening, I was sitting in the library's back corner when my phone buzzed again. Avis had sent me a video file. It took a moment to load, and when it did, I sat there frozen. It was footage from an old camcorder, dated, grainy, a birthday party in someone's backyard. I was 8 years old, standing in front of a cake. Jolene, 6 at the time, was crying because she didn't get the corner slice. I handed her mine. The camera caught Corliss laughing, saying, "She always knows how to keep the peace." The footage ended there. Avis had added one line of text beneath the file name. "She's been cleaning up after you since she was in single digits." I posted the video on Facebook. No caption, no context. Within an hour, it was everywhere. The comment that stuck with me came from a retired teacher I hadn't seen since middle school. "Not everything needs a mic. Some things just need memory." And still, despite the vindication, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steadier, not happy, not sad, just less tilted. Justice doesn't always come with joy. Sometimes it's just a quieter kind of breathing. I walked back home. The sticky note I had taped to the fridge 2 weeks ago was still there. "If you need help, ask someone you respect." No one had touched it. I was pouring a glass of water when my phone rang. I knew the number before I saw the screen. "Avis," I answered. Her voice was calm, no anger, no excitement, just steady. "Are you ready to tell them everything? Not just what they did, but who you are now?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the note again, then out the window, where the yard still held the dent from the party tent. I exhaled. Slow. Because surviving them isn't the story. Becoming myself is. I sat in the kitchen, slowly stirring my coffee, as if the movement might settle something inside me. The silence in the house felt different now, not the kind that came from avoidance or apathy. It was the quiet of people scrambling behind doors, whispering into phones, trying to keep a dam from cracking. Jolene hadn't left her room. Corliss was on the phone again, her voice low and sharp, pacing from kitchen to hallway like a prosecutor prepping for trial. Wendell stood in the corner, with his arms crossed, staring blankly at the dining room window, his phone lit up in his palm but untouched. You can hear people scrambling, even when they're whispering. I took a sip and walked toward the hallway, just in time to hear Corliss through the slightly open door. No, she never co-signed anything officially, but we can't just let her withdraw all that. That's not how this works. Then Wendell, finally speaking up. We need to apologize. Before this gets out of hand. I leaned on the doorframe, letting the words soak in before stepping into view. It's already out of hand, I said, voice calm. You're just now feeling the burn. Corliss froze. Wendell looked at me like he was seeing someone else entirely. Maybe he was. I didn't stay long. I didn't need another debate about who did what, or who owed who. I already had the data, the timestamps, the receipts. The truth didn't need repetition. It needed boundaries. A few hours later, I heard a soft knock on my door. Then another. When I opened it, Wendell stood there, not slouched, not defensive, just still. I didn't know, he said. About everything. I should have paid more attention. I didn't respond. I waited. He hesitated, then added, I saw your spreadsheet. I saved it. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The first time he'd acknowledged me, not as the difficult daughter, but as the person holding the weight no one else wanted to see. You did know, I said. You just chose not to weigh it. He nodded slowly. And that was all. Recognition is louder when it's whispered by someone who never spoke. Back at my desk, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. I don't want revenge. I just want the lie to stop breathing. I started listing everything that still tied me to them: bills, property, documents, and began outlining the steps to legally cut each one loose. Love without boundaries becomes debt. Downstairs, I heard a door slam. Jolene. She stormed into the living room, tossing her phone onto the couch. I just lost a brand deal. They said I'm too controversial. You ruined everything. I stepped in, calm as ever. No, I stopped funding the fantasy. That's different. Corliss tried to intervene, arms out like a referee between boxers. We need to breathe, all of us. No one's the enemy here. I looked at her and shook my head. I'm not here to fix it. I was never the one breaking it. Later that night, as I folded laundry, an envelope slid quietly under my door. Inside was a handwritten note. Wendell's handwriting, slanted and careful, like he'd rewritten it 3 times. I'm sorry it took public shame for me to say something private. I sat with it for a long time, tracing the curve of his signature like it was some forgotten artifact of affection. But even a late truth is still a truth. The note still sat on my desk, untouched, since Wendell had slipped it under my door. I'd read it 3 times now, the handwriting shaky, uneven, like he wasn't sure which words would land right, or maybe like he was writing while still unsure whether they should be written at all. I'm sorry it took public shame for me to say something private. I didn't cry. I just pinned it above my desk next to the final invoice I had sent them all 2 weeks earlier. 2 pieces of paper, one full of numbers, the other of admission. Both confessions, one financial, one human. I sat down and opened the manila folder I'd labeled Exit Plan. Inside, printed screenshots, property paperwork, account logs, contact info for a lawyer a friend had used during her divorce. I added a sticky note at the top. Not about revenge, just rights. It wasn't some impulsive move. I'd been thinking about this for months, maybe years, just never seriously enough to say it out loud. I wrote out my list. Remove name from house deed, close joint savings, freeze access to any remaining shared credit, cancel the autopay on everything, open a P.O. box so I could stop dreading the mail. I pulled out my phone and called the lawyer. Hi, this is Kaylin Holloway. I was referred to you by Dina Abrams. I'm not going through a divorce, but I need to sever legal ties with some family members. She asked a few follow-ups, then said, Let's set a time to talk this week. Before hanging up, I added, It's weird. I'm not married, but I feel like I've been divorced from my worth for a long time. That night, I walked the house one last time before bed. The hallway was dark, but I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't want the glare, just the quiet. The family photo wall was still there, perfectly intact. My face in those frames had started to fade from sun exposure, washed out, like an afterthought. I didn't take the photos down. I didn't need to. I used to want to be seen. Now, I just wanted to stop shrinking. Back in my room, I pulled out my flash drive and copied everything over. Receipts, emails, voicemails, even the birthday video. I labeled the folder. For me, not court. Proof isn't always for defense. Sometimes it's for closure. I placed the drive inside my lockbox next to my birth certificate, shut the lid, and breathed. Then I wrote a letter. Not to them. To myself. You kept them afloat. They called you dramatic. You bled into the cracks. They painted over you. Now you walk. You don't burn bridges. You just don't rebuild what was never steady. I folded the letter, tucked it into the back of my journal, and left it unsigned. The email hit just past midnight. Subject, final title transfer appointment confirmed, Friday 11 a.m. I stared at it for a few seconds, then leaned back in my chair. That would be the last thing with my name on their mess. The exit wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. The title office smelled like stale coffee and toner. I sat across from a notary who barely looked at me as she stamped the final document that removed my name from the family mortgage. Her pen moved with mechanical efficiency, like this was just another day, another signature. But for me, it was the first time I'd signed something for myself, not because someone asked, but because I was finished. They once said I held the family together. Turns out, I just held the keys. No one showed up. No Corliss. No Wendell. Definitely not Jolene. It was just me and a stranger stamping the end of an era. I left the building without looking back. The sun felt too bright, like it had been waiting to see if I'd finally open my eyes. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. Corliss. Call me, we need to discuss this. Corliss again. You didn't even give us a chance. I stared at the messages, then hit block. No anger, no grand exit. Just disconnection. Sometimes closure looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. I walked 2 blocks to the cafe, with decent Wi-Fi, and took a seat in the corner near the window. I opened my laptop and logged into my social media, an account I hadn't touched in months. My profile picture was still from last year's Thanksgiving, a forced smile with Jolene cropping me halfway out. I uploaded a photo, my final invoice spreadsheet. The caption was short. Trick candles only look pretty until you realize they never blow out. Here's everything I paid while being labeled the family disappointment. I didn't tag anyone. No names, just facts. No rage, just receipts. It took 5 minutes for the post to catch traction, 10 for it to spread, a few shares, then hundreds, then thousands. You said what many of us never could. My mom made me pay rent at 15 and still called me ungrateful. Blood doesn't make it safe. The comments kept pouring in, stories from people I'd never met, strangers who had walked variations of my path. Jolene tried to do damage control. She posted a story with her usual curated lighting and makeup on point. Family shouldn't air dirty laundry. Corliss commented underneath one post shared by a mutual friend. We all made mistakes, but this is excessive. I didn't respond. Instead, I added one pinned comment under my own post. Laundry only smells when it's left dirty too long. Later that evening, a message popped up from Avis. You did it. But remember, your truth isn't just a weapon, it's a door. You get to walk through it now. I typed back, then I'm walking. I closed my laptop and slid my flash drive into my backpack. There was one last thing I needed to do. I opened the drawer at the bottom of my desk, the one I hadn't touched in weeks, and pulled out the paper crown. Still intact, still glittered. King of Disappointment. I held it in both hands, not with anger, but with recognition. Time to return what never belonged to me. I slipped the crown into my tote bag and zipped it closed. The plastic points scratched faintly against the lining, like it was resisting its own burial. I didn't give it the satisfaction of hesitation. I grabbed my keys, a folder with the last of my receipts, and stepped out the door. The drive to the house was familiar but sterile. No music, no daydreams, just the hum of the engine and the quiet certainty of finishing something I should have left undone years ago. I pulled into the driveway slowly. Their cars were there. I hadn't expected that. My plan was to slip in, grab a box I left in the back closet, and walk out before anyone noticed. But of course, the universe always has a flair for the inconvenient. I stepped inside, and the air felt heavier than usual, like a pause waiting to be broken. The living room was quiet. Only the ticking wall clock moved. I headed toward the hallway when I heard Corliss's voice from the kitchen. You came back. I turned toward her, voice steady. Only for what's mine, and one thing that never should have been. From behind her, Jolene emerged with her arms crossed and eyebrows raised. If you're here to make a scene, just know no one's clapping anymore. I shook my head. I'm not here for an audience. I'm here for closure. I walked past them without waiting for permission, opened the cabinet near the sideboard, and pulled out the glittery crown. It was exactly as I remembered it. Cheap, smug, and covered in gluey red sparkles. "You called it a joke, then a tradition, then harmless," I said, turning it slowly in my hands. "But this thing carried more truth than you meant it to." No one stopped me as I stepped outside into the backyard. I walked to the fire pit, the same one we used for summer s'mores and forced laughter. I dropped the crown inside, then struck a match and let it fall. It caught quickly, curling in on itself like even it was embarrassed by its meaning. Some stories need ash. I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. I stood there, letting the heat touch my face as the plastic warped and cracked. Behind me, I heard the door creak open. "This won't change what people think," Corliss said, arms crossed. "It already has," I replied. "I just needed to change what I believed." Jolene scoffed from the patio. "So now you're what? Some martyr?" I turned slowly. "No, I'm just no longer the joke." Neither of them spoke. For once, I didn't fill the silence. I walked past them and back through the living room, ignoring the photo wall with its curated smiles. I'd waited my whole life for them to listen, but the truth is, I never needed their ears. I just needed my own voice. I grabbed the last box from my old bedroom closet, one with a stack of old journals, some childhood sketchbooks, and the mug I'd always used for tea. Nothing valuable to anyone but me. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. I didn't even check for dust. I stepped outside, closed the front door behind me, and exhaled. I didn't burn the house. I burned the illusion that it was ever mine. On the drive back into town, I didn't take the highway. I took the back roads, the ones I used to ride my bike through as a kid, thinking they led somewhere exciting. Now I knew they led away from lies. I parked in front of a small independent bookstore downtown. Something about it felt right. Familiar, but unclaimed. On the community bulletin board near the cash register was a flyer printed on bright paper. "Open mic night. Share your story. This Friday. All voices welcome." I stared at it for a moment, then reached for it, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Some truths aren't meant to be whispered anymore. I walked out of the bookstore with the flyer still warm in my jacket pocket, like it carried more weight than paper should. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I wandered for an hour, past storefronts I hadn't noticed in years, letting the silence do what words couldn't. By the time I arrived at the cafe, the sky had folded into soft orange. A chalkboard out front announced open mic night tonight. Inside, fairy lights dangled over bookshelves and mismatched chairs. The host greeted me with a smile and a clipboard. "Still got one spot left if you want it." I nodded. No hesitation. Signed my name. Kaylin M. Last on the list. Fitting. I took a seat in the back, the paper crown tucked in my bag, burnt edges still brittle from the fire pit. I rested my hand over it briefly, then focused on each voice that went before me. Poems about grief, songs about lost dads, a man who stuttered through a love letter to himself. Then the host called my name. I stood. No hand tremor, no throat catch. I stepped onto the tiny stage and pulled the folded crown from my bag, holding it like a relic. "On my 20th birthday," I said, "my family gave me a crown. It read, King of Disappointment." A murmur rippled through the audience. No laughter. They planned it for a week, laughed when they placed it on me, called it a joke, then a tradition, then harmless. I took a breath, and 3 days later, they apologized. Quietly, privately. But by then, I had already stopped paying their bills, and their narrative. You could hear a spoon fall into a teacup in the corner. That's how quiet it was. "I wasn't angry I paid," I said. "I was angry they pretended I didn't. I never wanted thanks. I just didn't want to be erased." I reached into my coat and unfolded a single sheet. The spreadsheet. My final invoice. My proof. I brought the record, not for revenge, for truth. I clipped it to the mic stand. Someone clapped. Then another. then the whole room. I stepped down without bowing. I didn't need affirmation. I already had clarity. Outside, the air felt gentler. A woman in her 60s approached, silver curls tucked behind her ears. She looked like someone who'd held too many things in for too long. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I divorced a whole family last year. No court involved, just boundaries." We hugged once, brief, no names exchanged. "Sometimes," I told her, "the people who hear you best were never supposed to share your last name." She smiled and walked away. Later that night, curled in bed with the cafe still buzzing in my chest, I checked my phone. A single message from Jolene blinked on the screen. "You really had to go public?" I stared at it a moment, then typed back, "No. I had to go free." I deleted the thread. Not with anger, with understanding. Closure isn't clean, it's just quiet. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed against the darkness, cursor blinking in rhythm with my breath. I clicked on a blank blog draft and typed the title, "Things I Paid For and the Things I Let Go." I didn't write another word, not yet. But the door was open. The cursor blinked, but I didn't write anything more. I closed the laptop, folded the flyer from the cafe back into my pocket, and let the silence settle. 1 week later, the silence was still here, but now it felt earned. I opened the blinds in my new studio apartment in Fayetteville. Light spilled across bare wood floors. No background noise, no footsteps overhead, no arguing behind doors I didn't own. Just me, a chipped coffee mug, and sunlight resting on the spines of books I'd chosen for myself. The kitchen was small, but it was mine. A calendar hung beside the fridge, with no birthdays circled, no bills pinned. Just open squares waiting for new decisions. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It waits. Patient, steady. I didn't notice it arrive. I only realized it had been here when I stopped holding my breath. One box sat untouched in the corner. I knelt and pulled the tape loose. The label, "Loose Ends." Inside was the flash drive, tucked in a velvet pouch. The burned edge of the crown I hadn't tossed after the cafe reading. And a photo, one I didn't remember packing, of me at 10, smiling beside Corliss, Wendell, and Jolene. We were all in focus, all pretending. I looked at it for a long time. Not with rage, just distance. "I don't miss the people," I whispered. "I miss the version of me that thought they'd protect her." I didn't hang the photo. I slid it into the back of a drawer. Later, I sat by the window with my journal open and pen poised, but no script in mind. I wasn't writing for memory anymore. I was writing to let go. "This isn't about forgiving them," I wrote. "It's about forgiving myself for believing silence was safer than truth." There were things I had to grieve. The story I told myself about what love was supposed to look like, the ache of being the one no one chose outright, and the small, relentless hope that someone would have seen me before I had to see myself. And still, I was proud. "Sometimes the only justice you get," I wrote, "is living in peace." Mid-afternoon, I opened my inbox. Buried between newsletters and spam was a message titled, "Thank you." It was from a woman in Ohio. She had read my blog post and said she'd left a toxic family home after 3 decades. Her words weren't grand, but they were sharp and brave. "You helped me realize I wasn't crazy," she wrote. "Just conditioned." I replied without overthinking. "We're not broken. We were just bending in the wrong direction for too long." The rest of the day moved slowly, like a page turn you didn't rush. I gathered a copy of the final spreadsheet and slid it into an envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For the next girl who thinks it's her job to keep everyone else breathing." At a quiet park, I found a little free library beside a swing set. I placed the envelope inside, nestled between dog-eared romance novels and outdated cookbooks. Not everyone would find it, but someone would. That evening, I came home as dusk softened the windows. I didn't turn on music. I didn't open social media. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, sipping coffee that had gone cold. And still, I felt warm. They had called me a disappointment, over and over. Turns out, I just disappointed their illusion.